It's been a long time coming, but it's finally here. Bayonetta 3 has been a hotly anticipated title since announcement years ago. It has a lot to live up to, so without further ado, let's take a closer look at our favorite witch's third and most over-the-top act yet. Bayonetta 3 starts off just like the previous two games did, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Our titular heroine is out on the town shopping with her lovable lackey Enzo as usual, when all of a sudden the city is attacked by a huge, apocalyptic force, as tend to happen when she goes out on the town it seems. Not being angels from the first game or the second game's demons, Bayonetta and crew are thrown into a fight with a mysterious new threat. The opening is as wild and silly as we've come to expect from the series, and it gives a sense of scale and tone that this game will be going for. It's bigger and more chaotic than ever with a massive tidal wave, surfing on cruise ships, and more. I loved this aspect of the series and it felt like a nice, cozy blanket to welcome me back. Bayonetta's nonplussed attitude to the complete destruction of New York, Jean showing up in my personal favorite outfit ever of hers, and the new member Viola's introduction all felt like I was in for something awesome right from the start.
More cheap toys.
It doesn't take long for the game to kick off properly, and the immense familiarity that the game has is all there, but with some new spice to keep things interesting. The same stylish and over-the-top combat system has returned in all of its glory. The usual projectiles, punches, and kicks, and the various combinations between them for devastating attacks are all here once again. The basics of the system haven't really changed, and I think it's great to keep carrying on, as it's really fun and feels good to play. But like I said, there is a bit of extra spice here this time. A change that the third entry makes is the Demon Slave system. In the previous games, Bayonetta could summon her demons for certain cutscenes and make use of them there. But now, we can control them directly and are fully expected to. By pressing a button, the selected demon can be called out and controlled while Bayonetta herself becomes stationary. It took me a good while to come around to this mechanic, I will be honest. It's very awkward at first, and not having control of the movement that you're accustomed to after so many years took a little bit of time to click with me. However, once we unlock some abilities, the system really starts to click into place, and everything starts making perfect sense. It quickly became a favorite new mechanic, and in general the combinations are similar, but way more limited than Bayonetta herself. Each also has a really unique feel from each other as well. For example, Queen Butterfly is a bit more Bayonetta-like in her attacks, with punches and kicks, while Gamora the dragon is slow and lumbering. They all have their own unique traits and unlockable skills which are really awesome to earn. I particularly loved getting Ball's Poison Rain to activate. It's not long into the game before the real meat of the system unlocks. A combo finish with the press of the Demon Slave button. It causes them to appear for a single big attack before disappearing again. It's one of those small additions that I personally really enjoyed and got a lot out of. These quick summons can be used defensively, such as on witch time activation, or to counter incoming attacks. It felt really natural and enjoyable to use these after spending some time with it, and getting over that initial awkward feeling. So the general combat is similar and just as fulfilling to play as expected. The additional branch of Demon Slave abilities takes some initial getting used to, but it fit well into the overall gameplay. It won't be too long before you're pulling off the big combos with gusto. Praise aside, there is one big issue with the encounters. In Bayonetta 3, there's a lot more emphasis on large enemies than previous games to add a sense of scale to using the demons. While this adds a lot of bombastic movements, the downside is that the camera gets pulled back in most moments to show as much as possible. It not only makes the character smaller and harder to keep track of, but it also gives more chances for the enemies or something else to waddle in front of the camera as well. The other part of this problem is the solution that Platinum tries to implement to counter this. Enemies become semi-transparent when they're blocking the view. It sounds like this works on paper, but with so many effects and attacks flying off all over the place, it only adds to the visual garbage at times. The game never really becomes impossible to play as a result, but it was an instant gripe from the opening hour to the very last one as well. Of course, this is partly due to the limitations of the Switch too, but with the sense of scale that they're trying to hit, it's a necessary evil. So there's a bit of an issue with scale, visibility, and overall clarity in these encounters. But for some reason, the more powerful I got through unlocking abilities, the more comfortable I got with the annoyances as well. Don't get me wrong, I'd rather they not be there in general, but the scaling and power let me force my way through some of these encounters more simply instead of just getting used to it. Honestly though, the gameplay shined the brightest when I was fighting enemies that were of similar scale or in a position that they couldn't really interfere with the camera, which was most bosses. Viola the New Girl has her own chapters as well, though not nearly as many as Bayonetta. Viola's gameplay in and of itself is almost completely the same as Bayonetta's in terms of structure. She even has her own demon slave to use. Her major difference though is how witch time is activated. She uses a katana as a weapon, so of course it stands to video game logic that she has a parry. So instead of dodging to activate, it's triggered by the parry. There's a lot said about the difference here, and while it is fairly pronounced and takes some time to adjust to, I don't think it's quite that big of a deal. Deliberate timing is needed, more so than the general dodge for Bayonetta, but the mechanic works basically the same. Jeanne as well has her own stages this time around, but they are very different than the rest. Instead, they play more like an elevator panic style minigame if you have any clue what that game is. I admit, I'm not really a fan of these. Even after waiting 3 games for my girl to get her own shine, this isn't what I wanted. Still, they're not overly long and there's only a small handful of them, so I can't really knock it too much. As a unique gimmick though, it's pretty novel and interesting. These side-scrolling stealth stages are nothing too hard and I think the novelty is fun enough, though I definitely didn't go back for seconds. I still wish she got her own big stages this time around, and she can still be used in some side stages once you beat the game, but yeah, it's just not enough for me. Another new feature is pressing both sticks in for a super attack. As the gauge fills up slowly, you can pop off these huge attacks with really large range. They're all unique per weapon as well, so it's worth trying out all of them. That said, it's a bit disappointing because these never feel like the big thing to work towards and more of a footnote feeling of, oh yeah, I can do that. All of these come together well for the game's crazy boss encounters. When they're straight up fights, the game's various mechanics are on full display in their best moments. I never had too much trouble with any one boss, but the fights themselves were really memorable. Especially the intro and outro segments of the bosses tended to be these large-scale bouts of insanity like on-rail shooting from a train, surfing on buildings, or summoning the biggest, most insane version of the demon to fight. They're all pretty great. Particularly, I want to shout out the first Gamora and Paris area summon. They're easily my favorite. None of this would matter though if the weapons were not awesome. I thought it would be hard to top Bayonetta 2's weapons, but wow, they certainly did. Not only are there more weapons than ever, but they're all even more unique from each other than expected. From the usual 4 handguns that she's known for, to a large hammer sniper rifle hybrid, bladed fans, and my personal favorite, a spear mic stand, and more. Each has their own corresponding demon slave as well. They're all just so unique and fun to experiment with that I'm really glad that there's so much attention being put into them. Outside of combat, there's a little bit of exploration that can be done as well. Going off the beaten path lets you find secret items, fights, and puzzles. So many puzzles this time. The extra challenge areas return as well that give out parts for health and magic upgrades. These of course range from the simple beat the baddies to trickier encounters for completionists. Another small change this time around is Bayonetta's movement. Instead of the usual panther or bird, each weapon has their own unique form which has their own unique movement options. For example, the spider can stick to walls and swing, the bird can glide, and the frog can jump vertically higher than anything else. It adds a bit of extra layers to things and can even make some secondary visits to areas easier in terms of getting extras. This time around there's quite a few movement and platforming challenges as well, much to my chagrin. Personally, I hate platforming in general, but especially in character action games where it's not made for it. While the majority of these aren't too bad, for impatient types like me, I honestly started skipping them after a while. They reward more items and upgrades as expected, so doing them eventually is encouraged. But seriously, I would much rather fight a really difficult encounter for a challenge in a game like this, instead of some movement platforming challenge nonsense. You can also unlock side chapters too. By collecting the 3 Umbran animals in a stage, you can access a secondary challenge stage. These are simple stages that are a nice bit of extra reward for those who are interested. Once again, the movement challenge of collecting the animals is a bit annoying. Cats run in a loop, frogs make a sound that give a hint to their location, and finally ravens fly in a set path that need to be run down before resetting. More often than not, I skip these on my first playthrough, but I did make attempts when I saw them. The cat and raven in particular are a bit more frustrating than I'd like. In all, the gameplay of Bayonetta 3 is familiar and even better in some aspects. The added demon slaves make combat bigger than ever, but the lack of clarity in fights thanks to the large enemies and demons running around is a bit of a sore spot for the presentation. Even with that though, the combat remained consistently rewarding and fun to play. And while the movement challenges were more of a personal gripe than anything else, they tended to work well and never hit a level where it didn't really make sense, even if I didn't really like them. There is simply a lot of game to chew on here even after you roll credits.
Let me handle this.
Sadly, the same can't really be said for the story. It once again remains one of Bayonetta's biggest weaknesses. While the story here is more easy to make sense of this time around than the time-bending shenanigans of the previous entries, it still leaves a lot to be desired. It felt like a lot of the basic elements of the story were finally revealed in full when the credits were starting to run, but things like motivation for the villain and more insight into what was happening with the main cast were left to the wayside. Granted, the story itself is pretty predictable, and a lot of the big reveals were super obvious hours before. I did, however, love the premise of a multiverse hopping story. We get to see several different worlds, each with their own Bayonetta to interact with. Each one of these is unique and distinct with their own personality quirks, but they're also similar to each other too. I really enjoyed seeing them honestly, and I think Hype Beast Japan Bayonetta was easily my favorite. It would have been great to get a bit more of these alternate Bayonettas purely because the ones we did get are so enjoyable. I also really love that the outfits are unlockable for players. The several different costumes each have their own colors which can be changed as well to suit your personal taste. It's a simple but fun little extra that gets unlocked as you progress through the game. And once again, players will have to unlock the various abilities and traits for their weapon sets. The costs aren't too high, and I think it was perfectly balanced for the way the game makes them rewarding to earn, but it doesn't take so long that it hinders the enjoyment of combat as you play the game. You can also create consumables with the resources that you find in the world, or you can buy them from Rodan's shop. The process is the same as usual, where you rotate the stick to make them. The usual bout of accessories returns as well, with a few new interesting additions to complement the new gameplay changes. One last topic to hit on is the game's general performance and visuals. When you talk about Switch games hitting their hardware limitations, Bayonetta 3 is going to be a poster child for this. Almost immediately I noticed the almost raw, jagged, muted look the game has. When you compare it to the more smooth, vibrant look of the previous entry, it's pretty noticeable. It really looks like the game's resolution was dialed down as much as possible to eke out whatever performance they could, and a very high level of film grain was used to alleviate it. It makes for a game that's a fair bit uglier than its predecessor. Even worse, it goes all over the place with a really unstable nature. It rarely sits in the 60 FPS range, but thankfully it doesn't hinder gameplay in my opinion. But it definitely sticks out when the frame rate is honestly all over the place. This is another game that's begging for a Switch 2 or whatever upgrade. Overall, Bayonetta 3 is an amazing game and a worthy third entry. The combat and gameplay are all still top notch, and most of all, it's fun to play and master. The new mechanics with the demons really comes into its own as the game progresses, and it fits into the whole package nicely. While Viola and Jean's gameplay segments might not be everyone's favorite, the added variety is definitely welcome. And the story does leave a lot to be desired, but some of the bullet points like multi-dimensional Bayonettas is really fun. There's plenty of side content to do as well, so it'll keep completionists busy for quite a while. Still, the amount of movement challenges in the game were more of a personal annoyance than anything. Even if I don't like them, I'm sure other people will appreciate them. The game's general performance also leaves a lot to be desired as well, and the hope for a Switch follow-up really comes into my mind to give this game its due. At the end of the day, Bayonetta is a full recommendation for me. If you're a fan of the series or character action games in general, then the over-the-top nature of it all is back in its full glory for you to enjoy. You'd be doing yourself a disservice to miss out on the Switch's latest and maybe greatest adventure. But that's it for this review. Please like, subscribe, and please have a good day. Leave a comment down below if you've been playing Bayonetta 3, if you enjoyed it, if you hated it. Did you like the movement puzzles and am I a crazy person for not liking them? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, have a nice day.
What was that about crushing? I think you'll find we're extremely game for that.